Hello, and welcome to So You Think You Can Rule Persia, the podcast where we rate and review all the kings of Persia from Diocles to Yazdegerd III. I am Sariel, and my pronouns are they, them.
And I'm Umberto, and my pronouns are he, him. And today is episode 92, Yazdegerd III, at long last.
We made it through the entire intro. We did it.
We've made it to the
We
intro.
arrived.
We have a Diocles episode, and as of today, we have a Yazdegerd III episode, and all of them in between.
Exciting.
And soon we'll find out who is the most of all. But for now, we still need to get through Yazdegerd III. What are your thoughts, Sarah? What are your expectations for Yazdegerd III? What are your hopes, your fears, your desires, everything?
We talked a little bit about this on our last episode, I believe.
That's right.
But now I know that there's 19 years until we decide to cut off the story of the Persian Empire, right?
Yes.
So obviously he does better than all of these kings before, like at least better than the last, 10? Like, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been, well, let me look that up for you, but
yeah,
it's
how
been
many?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 successions.
Yep.
8. It's been 9 successions in 4 years.
I will never
been
recover
tough.
from the anxiety, but
Yeah.
it seems like we're entering a new period of stability. I am just very curious. If this were like in the middle of the podcast, I'd be like, cool, we're like starting a new dynasty or like restarting something and sort of kickstarting a new period. But since it's the end of the podcast, I am curious to find out why it's the end. What happens that made you and a lot of other experts agree that this is a good point to stop, because this is a good point where you could make the argument that the Persian Empire is no longer the Persian Empire, or it's not the same Persian Empire that it was before.
Yeah, basically, this is the point where antiquity ends, or late antiquity ends, and the Middle Ages begin in Iran.
That is a
And
big
they'll last until the early 1500s.
big difference.
So yeah, exactly. So it's something momentous, is going to happen.
I am very curious.
But
Can't
we'll find
wait.
out, yeah. Also, yeah, we haven't heard about Yazdegerd III before. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because Yazdegerd is a character we've met before with a new name? Or do you think it's just like, no, it's just popping out of the woodwork and he's gonna take center stage?
If I'm being honest, on one hand, legitimacy means nothing anymore right now.
No, it's gone.
They've tried.
Yes.
It's come and gone. They keep trying to make claims tying it to this or this other family. At this point, I doubt anybody cares.
Mm-hmm.
It would make sense if he's someone we have heard of before. Unfortunately, my memory is trash. So I am not going to remember
Happens to the best
who
of
we
us.
have. I did not take notes. I gave up taking notes about like around episode 2. And I
Yep, fair.
do not remember. I'm also, it's been a tiring period of my life, which means a lot of the things we talk about and we chat about is the good time as it happens, but I retain very little of it. So, surprise me, I guess.
And I'll reintroduce you to the main players in our summary of the past
Good.
episode.
Thank you.
So, all right, let's get started with the recap of Boran's episode that we had last time. So, what happened last time? Well, a woman, Boran, was in charge after her
Yes.
sister Azarmidokht was blinded. But as we'll remember, Boran wasn't really in charge. She was, nominally there, but the real person with power was Rostam Farrukhzad of the Ispabudan family. So, one of these great noble houses, basically the guy in charge of the last big army in the empire. And well, he's in charge. Basically, Boran gave him the regency for 10 years, and after 10 years, Rostam is meant to give it back and say, yep, here you go, you can rule again. Whoever you are, whoever the legitimate heir is. And, well, Rostam did a reasonably good job. He managed to restabilize the empire well enough under Boran's shield, and he won a battle called the Battle of the Bridge against some Arab raiders. So that was nice. That was a nice piece of legitimacy he was getting. Then the problem is that Rostam left Ctesiphon for a weekend off or something, and Boran was captured and either killed or simply arrested and helped make Yazdegerd king. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens about Yazdegerd. So all right, let's start with Yazdegerd III. What is his life? Who is he? Where does he come from? Well, Yazdegerd III is indeed somebody we haven't heard from before. Because he was born in the year 624, probably.
Sure.
We're not sure. Some sources make him a bit older than this, but it looks unlikely, and in the end it's not really important. But, the point is, he's young. In the worst case, he is 8 when he becomes king. Ooh. In the best case, he is 15. So,
ooh.
8 being more likely.
I would not have any faith in this going well if I didn't know that it's going to go relatively well.
So baby Yazdegerd is born in 624 in the good old days, back during the Khosrow II's reign, when we were just gearing up for the final siege on Constantinople, and finally we'll take down the Roman Empire and rule forever and everything will be fine.
Oh.
No, exactly. This is just, it's been short.
The last episode has just been extending a period of 2 weeks for so long.
Yeah, the caption for the last episodes is Extended Sounds of Empire Decay.
Yeah.
But who's Yazdegerd's parents? Well, Yazdegerd isn't the son of Khosrow II. He is the grandson of Khosrow II through his favorite wife, Shirin. So that makes him the nephew of Azarmidokht, or possibly son, depending on weird dynastic mixing. And also, he was the half-nephew of Kavad II and Boran. It's okay. Baby Yazdegerd grows up, strong and hearty, and then when he's 4 years old, all hell breaks loose. Because when he's 4 years old, he finds out that his uncle Kavad killed Grandpa, his father, and all other uncles to ensure nobody would challenge the succession. A plan that had no repercussions whatsoever for the next 4 years of civil war. Then, as we saw, Kavad died, and this led to a massive vacuum in legitimacy. So between the ages of 4 and 8, Yazdegerd is constantly seeing changing rulers at the head of the throne, and he is seeing his parents murdered, and other family members either horribly mutilated or murdered as well. So, he's having some trouble growing up. This is not a nice household to be in. And, also remember the plague, Serial. That's also an extra fear we need to have.
Yeah, I mean, that's always there, yeah.
Good to know. But then at last we get to June of 632, when Boran is either executed or arrested by some nobles in Ctesiphon when we're away. And well, the advantage is that, Yazdegerd isn't in Ctesiphon. Yazdegerd is in Persia proper. And he was just being raised sort of away from the political center because it was unsafe there. There's been a coup every 5 minutes, so it's important for him to be raised somewhere that's a little bit more stable. And at this point, Serial, something surprising and I think fun happens. Because who has all the power in the Empire, Serial?
Well, that depends how the structure of the empire is looking. Sometimes it's the Shahanshah, right? King of Kings that can...
Yes, but we don't have one now.
Sometimes it's whoever has the most military power at the moment. So whoever, the general that has the biggest army.
Yep, Rostam
Sometimes
the regent.
It is the nobles or one particular noble family. Yeah. Sometimes there's, asterisks, exceptions of...
Yes, fair.
A, religious ruler or, some other empire that is currently puppeteering the entire Persian Empire.
Well, now, the main issue is that the people who have the most power are the ones with the swords right now.
Yeah.
There's no legitimacy, so the fact that I can stab you is the highest legitimacy.
Yep.
And the fact is that seeing the 9th succession in 4 years, the army just basically rebels against all the
Oh my
nobles
God.
and says, "No, stop it.
That's great.
Stop
Finally,
it, all of you."
I mean,
Just-
they had to make their own stance at some point. Because the nobles have just been doing whatever they want for the past, 4 years.
And so the army tells all the nobles, "No, stop it. We don't care. Enough of your games. The empire's falling apart. Can't you see? Just stop it. Just pick someone. We don't care who. Just pick somebody and go with it for a few years. How does that sound? Just do it, please. The empire's falling apart."
Key point, stick with them for a few years. Stop changing kings or queens every 3 months. Please, I'm
we don't
begging
care.
you.
Just someone. And the army says, "If you're not going to do this, we'll stop listening to any of you and you're all screwed, okay? So just pick someone. We don't care."
Legit.
So at this ultimatum, all the nobles get together and say, "Oh damn, that we've gone too far, I guess." So the nobles in Ctesiphon, or at least some of the nobles in Ctesiphon, make a deal with Rostam, the head of the army, the noble from the Ispabadan family, and they say, "Okay, you know what? Rostam will be the head regent. He can continue having his job, and we can choose sort of a compromise king. You 8-year-old child, you'll do.
No.
You can be king."
That's so evil. Of all of the people, right? That they can choose from.
Yeah.
They're like, yes, the child that has not been educated enough and has any backup and can just be killed, has no experience.
Yeah, but that's not the point, The fact is that he's not going to interfere, at least for another decade or so. So Rostam can enjoy all the power, and, well, we'll see what happens after the crisis is passed, then we'll decide what to do. I mean, after all, Shapur II turned out fine, and he was king when he was just born, or before being born, so brilliant. Love that.
Yep.
So they decide little baby Yazdegerd III will be king of kings. And, well, Rostam is going to be in charge, really, but Yazdegerd gets to be on the coins and everything, so that'll be nice for him, won't it?
Yeah. Sure.
At the time, the young prince was living hidden in Persia, which was pretty good for legitimacy because the nobles crowned him in a fire temple that was supposedly built by Ardashir I, Ardashir the Great, the founder of the empire. So, symbolically, it's a nice touch, where the empire started, this is a new birth for the empire. Back where it started at the beginning, Yazdegerd III will be the dawn of a new age. It's also possible that the capital was still in the hands of some of the nobles that had killed Boran and were still semi-rebelling, so maybe that was a bit unsafe before the army went back. So it was time to crown him quickly just so he could look nice, and then we can move on to the capital and do everything properly there. And so Rostam, with his new noble companions, now as supreme regent of the empire, manages to march on Ctesiphon, executes Boran's killers, and fully enthrones Yazdegerd as the final legitimate king at last. The crisis period is over. He is going to be in charge. Let's go.
Cool.
Although, to be fair, we should remember that the empire's still not united. All those regional rulers mentioned in Shapur V's episode are still hanging around and will have some power at least until 5 years after the enthronement of Yazdegerd.
Mm-hmm.
But now, at least the process of rebuilding can start. We have one army in charge of one general under one king, and he can just mop up the borders. Yeah,
this is an improvement
and restore things. Yeah, exactly.
I'm fine with this.
Good stuff. But Serial, there was one thing I mentioned last episode. Do you remember who we lost contact from? Because we lost contact from a part of the empire.
True.
Do you remember who that is?
Wait. I don't know why my brain is like, Yemen, that's not, no.
Yemen is correct.
It is?
Yemen is correct, yes.
Wait, what?
That is it. We've lost contact from Yemen and
trust your gut, I guess.
Of the Arabian Peninsula.
I was like, why? Okay, why did I think it was wrong? I guess because it feels
Yemen is far away, so it is counterintuitive, but we did own Yemen for a bit, yes.
Yeah, and then it just disappeared.
So.
We just stopped receiving messages from them. Mysteriously.
Yeah, exactly.
But nothing is wrong. We just,
Everything's
they
cool.
just cut contact
So we receive more information, Serial.
Ah, good.
Because it looks like Yemen and the southern coast of the Persian Gulf have joined a new state under a prophet of a new religion. But what happens is that pretty much about the same time that Yazdegerd is enthroned, this prophet dies. And as we all know, Serial, what happens when prophets die? Everybody forgets them and nobody remembers what they preach and everything.
Of course, yeah, no. There's just like a normal person and they, like, over generations get forgotten. Clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
No omens, no nothing.
No, everything's fine. Nothing's important. Well, the problem is that now, you remember the Battle of the Bridge, things sort of continue a little bit. Because in 634, a large Arab raid pierced into Mesopotamia and destroyed a lot of the fortifications pointing to the desert, and managed to defeat a series of Sassanid-aligned Arabs in the area. Now, normally this is an issue that would have been dealt with by the Sassanid Arab allies, you know, the Lakhmid kings that were on the border of Mesopotamia and were allies, but the fact is that Khosrow II annexed them as part of his plan to take over, you know, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, that whole area there. And so we don't have independent Arab allies anymore. They're sort of working with us, but they're not handling the situation themselves. So things are a little bit messy now because, well, we don't have much backup. So that's a bit of a problem. But the good news is, Serial, that we soon receive news that these Arabs have decided to attack the Roman Empire. And if you remember, the Roman Empire was massively weak as well. They also had a single army, and things were messy. And so a large Arab force gathers against the Roman army at the Battle of Yarmouk in Syria, where, coincidentally, remember the son of Sharbaraz Niketus? He's at this battle. He's fighting the Arabs on the Roman side.
Okay.
And, well, how do you think the battle ends? How do you think the Romans do against these raiders? We've managed to defeat them once at the Battle of the Bridge, so that's good, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that the Romans weren't doing great currently, which was good for us because it was one less thing that we had to worry about, but...
Yeah.
This is against the Arab raiders, which we very ominously said, oh, we defeated them, and I'm sure they will not become a problem at all in the future ever. They're gone.
Perhaps, yes.
So I'm going to say the Romans lose.
Well, Serial, at the Battle of Yarmouk, the entire Roman army is annihilated. The last Roman army is gone.
Uh-huh.
The Arab forces of this new caliphate under the Caliph Umar stream through Syria and Palestine and take control of them and unite them into this new entity.
Cool.
In 636, then, about 10,000 Arab soldiers march into Mesopotamia with another 20,000 on the way. And apparently this wasn't the most important front for them, though, because their prophet, a man called Muhammad, had pointed towards Syria as the main target, and Mesopotamia was mainly ignored and was mostly second-class citizens engaging with this expedition. So seeing this large force, a bit like the one at the Battle of the Bridge, but slightly larger and slightly more experienced, Rostam the regent decides to take all his forces and face off against them. He will be in person. He defeated them once. He'll do it again. Also because, you know, the legitimacy of his regency follows from all of this. He is the one that saved them, essentially. He is the general of the last Sassanid army. The last Roman army's been defeated. The last Sassanid army needs to stand strong. And there were disagreements in the court between different factions, because Rostam wanted to face the Arabs with many smaller armies, one at a time, because he thought, okay, these are just simple raiders. We saw at the Battle of the Bridge, if you bloody their nose enough one time, they'll just scatter. They're not used to large field battles. If they get defeated, they'll just run away back into the desert. We'll never have to worry about them again. While the pro-Sassanid faction of the court, the ones that wanted Yazdegerd III to be on the throne, they think, no. Rostam needs to show that the empire is strong. He needs to show that we have our crap together, we know what's working, we can handle the empire. So smash them all entirely in one battle, put all your eggs in one basket, but it will be a decisive victory.
All or nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we fight the Arabs a tenth of an army at a time, well, then we're going to lose that 10th at a time, and
Yeah.
then we'll just be wasting our forces. So
True, because
what
it's
are we
not
gonna
going to be
do?
enough. They're going to push against it, and then we will have a weaker army to go
That's right.
against
So
them.
we need to use all our resources to finally show them who we are and break them down.
Either it works or it doesn't. Like, truly.
Yeah, exactly. Serial, what would your opinion have been? Let's see if you choose what the Sassanid Empire chose. Do you go like many small armies to test them and they'll just dissolve, or one big army? Yes, it's risky, but we can do
Here's
this.
the thing, like, it all depends on the strategy you're using. Because if you have inferior military power, just by numbers alone, right? Because I assume that we have similar weapons, so it's not like we have like a technological advantage, and it comes down to numbers, then you should choose a strategy that is going to benefit you and benefit your lack of numbers. So for example, I assume this is why a lot of revolutions and forces that are militarily like inferior to their opponent use guerrilla is in English, right?
Yes.
Sort of model where like you do small skirmishes that debilitates an army or a force that don't require many men.
Yeah, sure.
So if you have a good strategy that can make use of planning and terrain and like good, well-trained individuals, you could have a chance. If it's purely a numbers game, then you just do what I do in Stellaris when I don't know what to do anymore, which is like you just put all of your ships together and see how many you actually have, and then hope that the enemy runs out of numbers before you run out of numbers. But that's always
fair.
It feels very up to chance, because it feels very, it's just, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, Mesopotamia is pretty wide open, so it has big plains, so, it's not like a hilly territory where you can hide in the mountains and pop out. So it is a little bit complicated to do guerrilla tactics there, but, I mean, that's sort of what Rostam is advocating for. So what would you say? Would you follow Rostam, Cyril, or the pro-Yazdegerd nobles?
If you're just going to use the strategy of you just send men to them one way or another to just fight, then I would put all my forces in one basket. Because otherwise it is the problem we were discussing before. Like, you just have a small army that is not going to make a huge impact, because they will just replenish the forces that they've lost. So we lose our army 10% by 10% by 10%, and they genuinely do not dwindle in numbers. So each time that we attack them, we have less men to attack them with, which doesn't make any sense. That's why I was like, it really depends on strategy. Like, if we're facing them straight on, then just have everyone fight. If you're using guerrilla warfare, then maybe it'll work. But
yeah, the problem is that Mesopotamia is very flat and open, so it's difficult to do guerrilla warfare there.
It's difficult to do skirmishes and ambushes, I guess.
Yeah.
What about what we've learned about the tribes from the steppe and, like, horseback riding, sort of?
Oh, we're trying. It's just that the other people also do horseback riding.
Yeah.
They've learned things.
Then I don't think we can do much, because it is a numbers game in the end.
Well, in the end, Rostam is pressured into attacking with his own force. He decides to gather all the remaining armies of the Sassanid Empire with a large force of some tens of thousands of soldiers. You said it's a numbers game. Honestly, it looks like they were roughly equal, because sources from both sides say, oh, the other sides were overwhelmingly more than us. So there was like 10 times as many. And it was like, oh, no, the other side was 10 times as many, which sounds like, pretty much the same amount, probably. And you just wanted to make your victory/defeat look better. But the two sides face each other at a place called Qadisiyah. And there are 3 days of hard-fought battle, where the forces are exchanging blows. We have records of many heroic duels by famous and important soldiers on both sides, and Rostam himself, the regent of the empire, charges into battle. But at a crucial point in this fight, Rostam himself is killed and falls in battle.
Yeah.
And with his death, the rest of the army is crushed. The last Sassanid army that had survived all this war, all this period of civil war, has been destroyed by the army of this new caliphate.
I am not surprised. Like, this is not at all like, oh no, what are we gonna... I'm like, yeah. This is when you're playing Imperium, or I guess Civilization, for anyone who doesn't live in Spain and Italy.
Yeah.
And you just see these huge numbers of armies coming towards you, and you're just like, no, please, I need to make more soldiers. I still have like 5 people. Go attack. And it just, slowly reduces and just disappears. Yeah.
And these new Arab soldiers, Serial, they have a certain conviction, because they're not only fighting for their country, they're fighting for a new religion that has just arisen, the new religion of Islam, which has just started up.
Oh, that will give you a lot of motivation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as their new caliph, their representative of the prophet of God, the last prophet, Serial. This is the final prophet of all. Well, they've been told to go out and conquer in the name of God. And so they are doing quite successfully.
Yeah, that'll do it.
The imperial standard of the Sassanid Empire, covered in precious fabric, jewels, 11 meters wide and 16 meters tall, with trophies from all the victories of the empire's history, was captured by the forces of the caliphate and cut into pieces to be given to the victorious army. And this left Mesopotamia wide open for conquest. And, well, I mentioned it was the last army. All of the empire is open for conquest, but Mesopotamia especially, because the only thing between the victorious army and Ctesiphon is a couple of rivers. The Arab forces then decide to march on Ctesiphon, as some forces in the west march on Antioch and Damascus and start taking it from the Romans, who have entirely broken, and the Emperor Heraclius has gone mad with grief. Because he tried to win, he tried to reconquer the empire, but now it's all going away again. The Arab forces in the east are marching against Ctesiphon, and there they began besieging the city of Ve Ardashir, once the city of Seleucia, the old capital of the Seleucid Empire back 1,000 years ago, and they managed to capture it in a short amount of time. At this point, the 12-year-old Yazdegerd III sends a message to the Arab leaders, and he says, please, I'll give you everything west of the Tigris. Just please go away.
Is it
We've had such a hard time.
Yazdegerd III writing, or is it like someone writing on his behalf?
We don't know.
He's still very
either
young.
Yazdegerd III or whoever is his regent. He probably signed the piece of paper, but
I see.
Is
in
it
his
him, or is
name,
it just like
sure.
Yeah. The problem is that there's also probably a power struggle going on because, well, Rostam the regent died in the Battle of Qadisiyah. It's over.
Yeah. So
who
maybe
is in
a
charge?
council
It's
of nobles were like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah. There's an emergency council saying, okay, I don't know, just offer them whatever they want, please, give up. But the Arab negotiator replied that there would never be peace between them until they could eat the honey of Iran with citrons of Mesopotamia. So the only way is for the empire to fall.
Yes. I'm still thinking of that cute drawing you shared with me of Iran, the cat that wanted to be left alone.
Yes, that's entirely fair. That is 1,000 years separated, but the vibe is still very similar.
It keeps happening. Then again, it is precisely like this Middle Eastern geographical point where...
Yeah, it's in the middle of the East. Everybody wants it.
Yeah, all of the conflict happens. And that is purely, like, geographical.
Yep.
Damn.
So, yeah. All the court panics at this point, and Yazdegerd III and all the nobles are evacuated with the royal court and treasure to flee further east into Iran, into Persia proper, and there they can gather all the forces that the empire can muster to resist this invasion.
Mm-hmm.
Because this invasion has so far achieved what the Romans have failed to do in the lifetime of their empire.
Yep. It's so funny to me that like the Roman Empire falls, and then we're like, our arch enemy has gone. We do not have a purpose anymore. We immediately fall
It's like,
after.
well, damn, I guess we'll fade away into the east. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, apparently the court included 1,000 cooks, 1,000 musicians, 1,000 leopard keepers, 1,000 falconers,
Leopard
and
keepers?
many others.
1,000 leopard
you need them for
keepers?
hunting, Sarah.
How many leopards do you have?
Yeah.
What's happening?
At least 1,000, I would assume.
One per leopard keeper.
Yeah, at least you'd want that many. And apparently this still seemed a meager host to Yazdegerd, who was disappointed that he had to leave behind so much luxury in Ctesiphon.
I'm sure.
Although this is probably a way for the new Muslim historians to show Yazdegerd as a corrupt king and deserving of his defeat. In the meantime, Serial, the Caliphate forces march into Ctesiphon and seize the capital and make it part of their empire. And they will rename it as Al-Madain, which means the many cities. Because if you remember, Khosrow's better Antioch and Ardashir and Seleucia and Ctesiphon, all these other places are all part of one big city complex.
Oh,
and
I forgot.
Al-Madain means the cities.
I forgot. Yeah. Right, because they're like close together, basically. Like
yeah, it's all like squished together
other,
in like one massive metropolis. Yeah.
Wow.
And so the Arab forces march into it, and they manage to capture the innumerable treasures of the capital, including the crowns of all the past kings, the armor and the swords of Khosrow II that he was arrested in, and all other previous kings. The Caliph Umar had the crown sent to Mecca, where it was hung in the holiest of places, the Kaaba, the cube containing the black stone. That is the holiest place in Islam.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not there anymore because things happen in the meantime, but it was hanging there for a while.
I guess we will get to that in history, you know.
Yeah.
But it started
there.
there.
Spoilers for history. Stuff happens.
It was brought there, or it was like...
Yeah, the crown was brought to the Kaaba.
Yeah.
The Kaaba was there for theologically since the time of Abraham in 2000 BC, but it's been there for a while, but it's only recently become Muslim. It's been, about 20 years prior it's fully become Muslim.
Cool.
We're also told that in Ctesiphon there was a sad scene because the Arabs found the last surviving Sassanid war elephant in its stable.
Oh.
Sad and alone. And when they tried to get this elephant through the city streets, it suddenly collapsed and died.
I mean,
representing the death of the empire as well.
Yeah, who knows how they had been taking care of it, you know?
It's been a bad time.
Yeah, I assume it hadn't been great for the elephant either.
No, exactly. And well, this is a horrifying crisis for the empire because many important and experienced nobles had been killed in the Battle of Qadisiyah. The richest part of the empire, Mesopotamia, has gone. It's over. And the last remaining field army has been destroyed. And we have some garrisons that were looking at the borders from the nomads and India and pirates, I guess. That's what we have left. And at this point, Serial, the Sassanid citizens are subjected to the same questions as the Romans back under Khosrow II. They can fight to the bitter end for a teenage king they barely know, or they can submit to this new powerful conqueror and they'll have mercy. Most people think it's a pretty clear choice.
Yeah. Like if the empire hasn't been able to save itself and has just constantly been changing, this is just one more change. Take something that seems to be stable, which is what the Arabs are doing at the moment. They seem to be doing great.
Yeah, also, this new god's pretty cool. They seem to be winning a lot. That sounds promising. That's
they sure are winning the battles.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Also, the new caliphate is really cool with everything. They've recently marched into Jerusalem and they just told everybody who lived there, yeah, do whatever. We're just in charge now. Just keep paying taxes to us and you keep doing whatever you're doing. You get a tax cut if you convert to Islam, but otherwise, just do whatever.
Oh, I like that way to go about it.
Yeah. So between that choice and, no, let's resist to our last breath, Yazdegerd, the 12-year-old, will save us. It's like...
this poor
I think
this
I'll
poor
go with
kid.
the caliphate, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like some stability.
Yeah, these people are desperate for peace and stability.
Mm.
They've gone through the plague of Kavad II, which killed between a third and half of the empire, the famine, the years of civil war. If the Arabs can bring them peace, they'll take it. They're so tired. I mean, I'm sure nobody can relate with having tumultuous years with plague and economic turmoil and just wanting peace. So, yeah. But Yazdegerd isn't a quitter. Khosrow II didn't raise his grandson to be a quitter, or at least
he didn't raise
he
him.
didn't live long enough to raise his grandson.
I was gonna
quitter.
say this is not how it works. Yeah. I'm still very curious where we go from here, because it would be very logical to me to be like, okay, and now we enter the Arabian. What is the correct adjective?
Arabian is for the people. Arabic, I think, is for the language. Is what I've read mostly.
Okay, so the next Arabian league of our journey into like a new sort of empire, like this would make sense as a cutoff point. I'd be like, okay, completely new, not just like a new family or a new dynasty, completely new like culture getting into the empire. Cool. Goodbye, Yazdegerd III. You were a poor child and, did what you could, I guess, and now some other people are here and that's fine, and okay, thanks for listening, goodbye. But we're not at the end of the episode, so like, what happens? I don't get it.
Really? Because yes, Yazdegerd isn't a quitter. He decides, no, I'll gather all the armies of the empire. Everybody, every single person who can lift a sword. Okay,
because I was gonna say,
gathered in Persia.
I thought we had already used all the armies.
We'd used all the professional armies.
I see.
But,
but the people.
We can get random people, yeah.
The militia.
The people will protect Yazdegerd. And Serial, who do you think Yazdegerd calls for help? He writes a letter to somebody far, far away.
Wait, the son of this general who we sent to Rome? Oh my god. Nikitas? That would be so funny. Because Rome is also just gone.
That would be funny. He has been captured by the Arabs. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah.
Close enough.
What happened to Yemen?
Yemen, that's now part of the caliphate. They're Muslim now. They've decided this.
Who are we writing to?
Cool.
The Mongols?
Well, a bit further east. And south.
Who do we know? East and south. Someone in India or someone in like China?
China. Because we
had good relations.
It is the Tang dynasty.
Yeah, we had good relations with China, but like it's been a while. I haven't heard from them in such a long time.
Well, Yazdegerd writes a letter to the new emperor of Tang, China, saying, hey, I see you have a cool new empire. You've defeated the Turks and their cognate has collapsed. Thanks for that. That's pretty cool of you. We didn't need to fight on two fronts. Would you mind sending armies to help us against this new threat? And do you know what the Tang emperor answered?
I didn't know we had such a good relationship. I forgot that I guess we have diplomatic relationships, but like we haven't really,
yeah.
Why would they care?
Well, the Tang emperor answers to the letter saying, we're a bit busy right now. Have fun with your thing.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. Like, do they know who we are?
They're like, yeah, sure. Sucks to be you, I guess, but
good luck with that.
Good luck. Yeah, they basically sent a reply that was just like either non-committal enough to mean nothing or too late to be of any use. So yeah, what happens is that Yazdegerd gathers his forces. He gathers a large army of 50 to 100,000 soldiers, gathering everybody he possibly can. But in 640, the first attacks into Persia proper since the collapse of the Seleucid Empire begin, with raids across the sea from Bahrain. But the local defense pushed it back, and the Caliph Umar decided to hold back and gather a much larger force for an invasion.
Hmm.
The big one came in 642, when our boy Yazdegerd was 18. Happy 18th birthday, Yazdegerd. Because a great army from all across the empire was sent to a place called Nahavand in southern Media, where it would be directed to retake Mesopotamia and the capital of Ctesiphon. So if it's the last thing he does, Yazdegerd will remarch into his capital and take control once more. This was such a significant threat that the Muslim forces gathered most of their eastern armies and brought them to bear against Nahavand in summer of 642. The Sassanid army is estimated to have had 50 to 100,000 soldiers, while the Arabs had about 30,000.
But, just from soldiers from, like, civilians?
It's not necessarily civilians, but it's like people from local guards.
Yeah,
that
like
were
not
protecting
professional.
local forts and everybody.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
so professional.
They've had 6 years since the fall of Ctesiphon. They've tried to train up everybody they could to,
I see.
hold a sword and point it in the right direction. And they have a pretty big army now. They've done a good job, at the very least.
I did not expect this. Like, how was this allowed by the Arabs?
Well, the Arabs were just controlling only part of the empire, The Arabs saw that Yazdegerd had a strong frontier against the Arabs, and the Arabs were busy kicking Roman butt, and, oh look, Egypt's gone. That's fun.
Yeah. Okay. So we caught enough of a breather to train a bunch of people to make a new army.
That's right. And we meet the Arabs at Nahavand, outnumbering them either 2 or 3 to 1.
Yeah.
There was a colossal battle here, and, well, do you know who wins this, Ariel? Do you know who wins the Battle of Nahavand in 642? Crucial as it is.
So how many years has it been so far?
It's been 6 years since the fall of Ctesiphon,
and
where
by
we
then
retrained our soldiers and everything.
Yazdegerd was like 12, and we started at 8.
Yeah, Yazdegerd has
so it's
become
been 10
18.
years.
He has, yeah.
Which means we still have 9 to go, so I'm gonna say we win?
Well, Sariel, the battle was absolutely brutal, with important generals dying on each side, and a large proportion of their respective armies falling.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the Sassanid army was destroyed.
Damn.
The Arabs are utterly victorious.
Then how are we gonna make it another 9 years? Are you pulling my leg?
Well, Yazdegerd is not a quitter.
Oh my god, again!
Yes. Because Iran is wide open now, including Persia proper. And it's beginning to be occupied by the Muslim forces, who force Yazdegerd to flee to the south and east in the hope of gathering a new army, much like Darius after Gaugamela about 1,000 years prior. Although it looks like Yazdegerd was being loyally protected by the brother of Rostam, the regent who died a while ago, who understood that they needed a king for any organized resistance to be possible.
Yeah.
Yes, Yazdegerd could go out in a blaze of glory, but if he dies, then it will be civil war over who gets to be king.
Yeah, of course.
And everything collapses. They'll just
then there's no
apart.
chance.
So
yeah.
Yazdegerd needs to stay alive. He needs to be around.
Fair.
In this conquest, major cities fell to violence or due to the local nobles switching side in exchange for kind treatment.
The local nobles?
The local nobles, yes.
What is spoonerism?
The local nobles, yes. Local nobles who surrendered to the Arabs and obtained kind treatment in exchange. But it looks like in Persia proper, they put up an extremely fierce resistance against the invaders, with each city and fortress having to be conquered with nobody ever surrendering. Each fortress had to be fought for to the last man.
Wow.
And it required 5 whole years for the caliphate to slowly make its way through every fort in Persia and conquer most of the region. This also meant the extermination of the local aristocracy that had decided to remain loyal.
Loyal to?
Royal to Yazdegerd.
Right, yeah.
And remember, Sarah, that I mentioned that the nobles would stop being an issue after this episode?
Right, that made me so happy.
Yeah, they're all being exterminated.
I guess that's one way to go about it.
I guess. It's happening.
That's one way to do it.
Yes. But Sarah, there is a moment of light. Because the Caliph Umar, who had conquered Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, and parts of Iran, dies. And how do you think the caliphate will deal with the succession?
Do they up here? Did he have an heir? Someone lined up?
He hadn't named an heir. He's actually murdered by a Sassanid slave, incidentally.
Ooh, interesting. That makes for a great story. Just this detail, you can make a whole novel out of this.
You could absolutely do that, yes.
If someone has, text me. Let me know.
I did recently watch a TV series that is based on this. Some people consider it blasphemous. Fair enough. But it was a reasonably good series if you're not a Muslim.
That's so cool. That's so interesting, actually. I see how it could be blasphemous since it's like a religious war or a religious, like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you think they deal with the succession? Do you think they do a good job or they really mess up and everything explodes? And they lose all that they've gained?
Well, that's why I was asking, like, is there someone lined up to take over?
Well, he was murdered quickly enough that he didn't have an appointed heir.
See, that's a skill issue.
Mm-hmm.
You should not get that good and not name an heir.
But Sarah, he did name a council.
Okay.
Because he named a bunch of other companions of the Prophet Muhammad, and he told them, vote for somebody among you to become caliph.
Yeah, because that always goes great to just be like, you guys figure it out.
Yep. Because he was like, I am dying and I am kind of delirious from pain,
Yeah.
so I trust your judgment. You do it.
Yeah.
And well, the council elects a man called Uthman.
Uthman, okay.
And he's the new caliph. And you are kind of right in the fact that this will cause problems in the future. Someone is very unhappy with this. And, well, anybody who is familiar with Islam or the Sunni-Shia split will know why. But, yeah, no spoilers for history.
I see.
But the advantage for Yazdegerd is that a bunch of rebellions explode across the caliphate. Because, well, the caliph is dead. What are they going to do?
Yeah. So now instability happens. That's very lucky for Yazdegerd, actually.
Exactly. And a lot of the recently conquered territories assert their independence. But the Caliph Uthman is very skilled. Most of these companions fought with the Prophet to make Islam a thing.
Yeah.
And to fight against the pagan Arabs. They have fought for decades for this. They've known the Prophet and believe in the cause. They are not about to let this slip between their fingers.
Yeah.
So Uthman manages to reconquer everything that had rebelled and asks an increased tribute and exterminate more of the nobles that rebelled.
Mm-hmm.
So more noble families are being cut down. And this coincided with a new wave of expansion, with the Arab armies conquering the Roman lands that Khosrow II had once held in the west, and pushing even further east in Iran. The fact that the invasion was this fast has led certain scholars to suggest that the Romans only regained nominal control of these territories after the peace with the Sassanids, and they basically just sent a couple of representatives, and they didn't really have any control of the area. Because if we look at the caliphate on a map, it's basically the same as the empire of Khosrow II.
Huh.
So, in a way, the old empire that Khosrow had tried to make, this old universal empire, is being reborn through the caliphate.
Yeah.
With a different center, a different religion, and a different elective form of government. But, territorially, it seems to be reborn now.
Territorially, then there's like completely culturally different. But
yeah. And it's also important to remember that the Sassanid had used many Arab mercenaries during their original conquest of Roman territory.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the war has ended and these Arabs have returned to Arabia and found this new religion, well, they remember what they did to conquer those territories with the Sassanids. So they're clearly going to be a lot more skilled at doing this than otherwise. So, well, they say, oh yeah, I remember we won a battle against the Romans here 10 years ago. I remember how we did this. Let's go.
Let's just do it again.
Yeah. So now Yazdegerd himself is in his late teens, early 20s, and he tried to organize a resistance in Persia, which had recently rebelled after the death of Umar, but this resistance was crushed in a single methodical campaign.
Oof.
Although The Persians are really trying hard to resist. They're like, each time they're conquered, they rebel again, and then they have to be reconquered, and they rebel again, they have to be reconquered. It's really a grueling process of having to like crush down any resistance. And Yazdegerd is always there saying, come on, we can do this. I am the Shahanshah.
I have to admire his resilience, honestly.
It's impressive. For
he got brought into this as a kid, and he's like, this will be my mission.
Yeah, as a kid who has known nothing but hardship, he is doing his best. The man is trying. But yeah, this war is devastating for Persia because many were killed fighting to the last, many cities were left in ruins in retaliation, and many noble families are entirely extinguished because they just refuse to surrender. Yazdegerd tried to flee further east, but he had no money and no support, so he tried to get the support of the governor of Kerman first and Sistan later, but he managed to alienate both of them by demanding unpaid taxes. So they say, well, you've clearly failed in retaking the empire, we're just going to use the taxes to protect our own regions from the caliphate, and we don't really recognize you as king, because really, where is your empire? You're the king of nothing.
You're the king of nothing.
So fled to Khorasan in the north, where there was news of nomad attacks as well, which made a disastrous situation impossible, because, come on, way to kick a man when he's down. And here he proposed to flee among the Turks or the Chinese and organize a resistance from there. But the local people said that if he abandons them, they're not going to help it anymore. I mean, why should we believe you? Why should we fight for you if you're not going to be among us?
Yeah.
Like, either stay with us and fight or just leave forever and no hope of return. There is even a tale that one of his nobles wanted to betray him and hand him over to the Turks by encouraging the Turkic leader to invite Yazdegerd to come with only a small personal guard and leave the remaining army behind.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, the brother of Rostam, that had followed and guarded Yazdegerd all those years, warned the king not to go that way, but he wasn't listened to. And following this betrayal, this mistrust, Yazdegerd's guardian renounced his allegiance to the king and went to found his own splinter kingdom in Tabaristan, south of the Caspian Sea, protected to the south by the Alborz Mountains, where the dynasty, the Ispabudan dynasty, would continue lasting in some form or another until 1349, about, 700 years later. So, good call, I guess.
Yeah.
Although, it is interesting to note that during this last escape of Yazdegerd trying to survive, Persia, Fars, as it's coming to be called, still nominally saw him as their ruler, despite having exhausted all their options of resistance. Like, even until the end of Yazdegerd's life, we have coins of Yazdegerd in Fars saying, he's our king totally.
Wow.
Yes, we're being invaded constantly, but he is our king.
Truly a force in being able to rile people together and like give them a cause and like be a figure to represent like an ideology and a rebellion, I guess.
Yeah. So Yazdegerd continued trying to find support among his subjects, and he kept getting refused and sent away until he arrived to the city of Merv, up in the north and east of the empire, where the local lord was allied with a Turkic chief who conspired to take the king captive. In the Shahnameh, Yazdegerd gets ready for battle against the Turks, and I quote, "He appeared before the army, massive as an elephant, and the ground was awash with blood like the Nile." So he did as much as he could.
Damn.
But he found that he had been abandoned by all his followers, and so eventually he decides to run. In the end, in the year 651, Yazdegerd had fled after sunset and asked a local miller for hospitality that night. The miller didn't know who Yazdegerd was, but when he saw his rich robes, he decided to kill the King of Kings while he slept.
Oh no.
Although the Shahnameh has the miller be generous and forced to do the deed by the leader of the village.
I see.
Ferdowsi says that the miller told Yazdegerd, "The only rest you will find is that of the grave."
No.
And so the king sat, without food, his eyes filled with tears, until the sun rose. And the Shahnameh describes his death thus. The miller came up to the king like someone about to impart a secret in the man's ear, and plunged the dagger beneath his ribs. The king sighed at the wound, and his head and crown fell down to the dust, beside the barley bread that lay before him.
That's so sad.
His body was thrown in a nearby river where it got stuck on the branches of a tree, and it was then recognized by a Christian bishop who then buried him in a perfumed shroud.
Man.
And the Shahnameh then ends its history by saying, after this came the era of Omar, and when he brought the new faith, the pulpit replaced the throne. And this is the end of antiquity, the end of the old Iran, and the start of the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages start for multiple reasons, Ariel, because I will spoil the next 1,000 years of history for you, but essentially, for all the Middle Ages, from now 651 to 1501, 850 years of history, Iran will either be split apart into different components, there won't be a single empire, or will always be ruled by foreign empires of some sort.
Damn.
The empire falls, there will be nothing left. But the most astonishing thing that happens is that in 1501, a man called Shah Ismail I will reform the empire at last, beginning the modern age of Iran.
Wild.
Which is a pretty astonishing thing.
Yeah.
Because it's as if in 1501, in Europe, King Charles V of Spain and Germany decided to suddenly reunify the Western Roman Empire by conquering Italy, France, Northern Africa, and suddenly put it back together again. It's wild that Iran ever came back together and reformed the empire after almost 1,000 years of being broken.
To be fair, with how immense the empire of Charles V was, might as well have been the Roman Empire.
Fair enough.
Like,
you have a
different
whole new
geographical
world, so
place,
you know,
but like...
that's fair. Fair enough.
It kind of happened.
It's a whole new world.
It kind of happened.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So yes, that is the end. And, well, the Middle Ages are essentially this intermediate period when Iran is either ruled by foreigners, as it will be ruled by the Caliphate after this. The Caliph Uthman is the first one to have full control over Persia, since it's the one we're covering. And then afterwards, there will be several caliphates. The Mongols will pass through. The Seljuk Turks will take control of the empire. We will have a bunch of people that we've covered, the historians. Marco Polo will pass through. The Ilkhanate will be there. And then eventually, well, in the modern age, there will be the Safavid Empire. And then that will lead to the modern country of Iran at some point. But I would like to end today's narrative with the epilogue of the Sassanid dynasty, because Yazdegerd had children who survived him. Because Yazdegerd's son, Peroz, sometimes called Peroz III, fled to China to ask for help in restoring his father's empire. Peroz's petitions only resulted in the establishment of a Persian area command in Sistan, but he died in China in 679 after the Persian area command was taken over by the Caliphate. It's also kind of a bit sad and a bit funny that the Chinese emperor of the time has basically a garden of pretenders with statues of various people who went to him asking for their throne back. And Peroz is there as a statue saying, "Trust me, I was totally the king of kings, and I was servant to the emperor of China." And yeah. Another attempt was made by Peroz's son Narseh, who managed to gather a Chinese army, but this army only fought nomads and then went home when they'd finished their jobs, leaving Narseh high and dry. And he also has a statue in the mausoleum of Emperor Gaozong. And then in 728 or 729, there was a last attempt by another grandson of Yazdegerd called Khosrow to retake his old empire with the help of Turks or the Chinese. But his support wavered, and he lived out the rest of his life in China, where the family fades away into history, with their last attested member dying in the 9th century. And the rest presumably mixing up into Chinese nobility and getting lost. But one thing I hadn't said is that, well, the Yazdegerdi era is a thing that is still used to this day, which I think is adorable and also very sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Because many Zoroastrians who survived and are now a minority religion. Many of them, after the conquest of the caliphate, fled into India, for example, where they formed the Parsi community, of which Freddie Mercury was a member. Cool. Some of them, a lot of them do, use the Yazdegerd era, basically pretending that this is if we're looking at the year 2025, this is the 1393rd year of the reign of Yazdegerd III, because there hasn't been another Zoroastrian king of kings since. So they're saying, it's still Yazdegerd's reign, he's still in charge, we still believe him. He was a good lad. He tried his best. And there we go. That is the end of the Sassanid Empire. Serial, what are your thoughts?
That was a way more chaotic end than I thought it would be.
Yes.
Right? Like,
it does go out very noisily.
It became a full-on resistance, sort of constantly battling with Yazdegerd at the helm as a figure, of hope and whatever. Like, wild. Because like I said, when we lost the battle with the Arabs, I was like, yeah, that would be a reasonable point to just be like, and this is the end of the empire. And, kind of how not the Seleucids. It was the Seleucids. Sort of how they, like, fade, and there's still, like, a Seleucid empire, quote unquote, that is like a small chunk that continues to have, like, a succession of kings that stem from that Seleucid branch that was the Persian Empire, but we don't no longer consider that the Persian Empire because, like, they're just, over there doing their own thing and slowly losing power. So that would have made more sense for the end of the Persian Empire as we know it, because the Arabian forces displaced Yazdegerd and the empire per se away from the actual geographic region where it was. But then, like, he keeps fighting back, which is wild.
He keeps trying. You say what you will about Yazdegerd, but he at least tries. He does everything he can.
Yeah, no, like, he rose to the occasion and he played his role excellently. Because I would have completely understood if it were just like, oh yeah, he just gave up, or like he gets killed, or, like, disappears. I'm like, yeah, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, fair.
But he actually keeps fighting for it, which is wild. It's not like it went with a bang, but it also did not go away with a soft whisper. It, like, I don't know. It crackled and threw some, like, what is this called?
Raged against the dying of the light. Sparks.
Yeah. Some sparks around, and it was just, like, making a lot of noise. I don't know. That was very interesting. Not what I expected at all.
Yeah,
but that explains why we get, like, 19 years of stuff happening before the empire actually comes to an end.
Yeah, exactly. And now
at least, like, as we know it.
Part of why Iran is a Muslim country.
Yeah.
Because the first, or rather, the second and third caliphs take it.
That is very interesting, because we hadn't really had Islam up until now, because mostly because it wasn't a thing.
Yeah, well, the Islamic calendar starts in 622, which is when Muhammad flees from Mecca to go to Medina.
Yeah.
And Muhammad dies in 632 when Yazdegerd becomes king, and then we get the caliphs who massively consolidate and then massively expand the empire.
Wild. So cool. I see why you could make a break here. Because it's going to be a completely different empire from now on. But, like, sort of the same way that it changed with the Parthians.
I feel like this is, honest, I have, like, a lot of thoughts about this, but I feel like this is a lot like the shift between the Achaemenids and the Seleucids.
Yeah.
Because you have an entirely different culture from, like, the borders of the empire that you never had imagined.
I was going to say, it's like Alexander coming and changing the entire culture of it.
Yeah.
And turning the empire Hellenistic.
There's a whole bunch of parallels about what happens with the companions of Muhammad, which I feel follows a lot what happens to the companions of Alexander.
I see.
But that's a story for another time.
Yeah, we could chat about it.
Yes, that'd be fun.
Yeah, but that's the thing. We have seen this happen before. It was just relatively at the beginning of the podcast, so we would have had, like, let me calculate. 18 episodes until the big change with
Yeah, that
Alexander.
would have been like, yeah.
And then, again with the Parthians, and then...
I mean, yeah, we've seen that we've had 4 main parts. There's the old Iranian,
Yes.
the Medians, the Achaemenids, then there's the Hellenistic Argead and Seleucid Empire, then there's
Yep.
the Parthians, and then eventually the Sassanids.
The Sassanids, yep.
Well, we've now closed the curtain on.
Which the Sassanids was the longest stretch.
Sassanids lasted for the longest time of
Yeah.
all of them, yes. They lasted from 212 with Ardashir I unto 650 with Yazdegerd III. So it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's also quite fun. We have records of some Persians fleeing all the way to Japan. We have letters of a Persian man writing to the Emperor of Japan saying, I need to go back to fight for my king real quick. My wife is staying here as collateral. I'll be back, I promise.
Oh.
And that's all we know. We don't know if he came back or anything, but yeah.
You can't promise that you'll be back if you're going to war.
Yeah,
Like...
saying I'll try at least.
Yeah.
I guess the implication was I'll try and come back if I survive.
We're not trying to just flee your country. I am being called by duty.
Also, as we're getting here, since this was part of the intelligence speech this last year, it's also fun that one of the descendants of Yazdegerd III is sent by the Emperor of China to Constantinople as an ambassador on behalf of the Chinese to try and make a deal on how to fight the Caliphate, which is such a trippy thing.
Yeah, that's
one of the last Sassanid heirs finally getting to Constantinople as a Chinese messenger. Just wild.
It feels like such a literary twist of like, oh yeah, there's all of these callbacks to history. There's all of this.
Yeah.
What's the word? Not prophecy, right? References. But like all of this references to the past. Like it's very main character protagonist sort of vibes of like you give them a history that like ties everything together and they're just like in the right place. They just happen to be the chosen one for this job.
But yeah, so now that we have buried Yazdegerd III, shall we rate him, Serial?
Let's do it.
Our first category is final moments. How interesting was his death? Very dramatic. I mean, it's the end of the Shahnameh.
Very interesting because we have a whole story.
Because it then starts again. Yeah. So he is fled to the edges of the empire after years of fighting. And then finally he flees to a miller's place. And either the miller doesn't recognize him and just says, oh, it's just a rich man. I'll kill him and take his stuff. Or he does recognize him and is hesitant, but then eventually is forced to do this by the leaders of the village. And then Yazdegerd essentially just sad and alone, defeated, and he is just killed by this miller. Basically, we have the whole scene. We have the miller sort of like leaning in as to whisper something, and then he just stabs him in the ribs. Yeah. And that's how Yazdegerd goes. I think that's very dramatic. I like the detail we have. I don't think it's the most dramatic, but still, it's very scenic. What do you think? I'm thinking like a high, like above a 7, but I'm a bit in the dark beyond that. What do you think?
I think it's a really good story. I think part of it is a story. Like, I don't know how much of it is.
Yeah, of course.
Actual, you know.
The witnesses were the miller, and I don't know if he's told anyone, but yeah.
But his death was significant enough that the story was made and put on the Shahnameh and like passed down.
Yeah.
I think I'll go for an 8. It feels like one of the more like important, memorable, and referenced deaths that we will get. Not just by the death itself, but like how it impacts stories in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm going to go with an 8 as well. So with an 8 and an 8, he gets an 8 out of 10 for final moments, which is tied for top third death. Our next category is battle hardness. How good is he at war and fighting? Well, he tries, certainly.
Like, surprisingly good against all odds, even though, like, you know, the odds are the odds and things happen.
So, he starts off his reign with Rostam retaking Ctesiphon from the murderers of Boran. So, that's part of it. He's taken it. Then, there's the 2 main battles, essentially. The battles of Qadisiyah, where Rostam is killed and defeated, and the Battle of Nahavand, where the final big force is broken up. But then we also have to remember that he is constantly leading a fight, again, guerrilla warfare, as you said, in the mountains of Iran. Among every fort needs to be fought for, everything needs to be resisted. And this is mostly on the Iranian people, of course, because they didn't really have much support from Yazdegerd. He couldn't give much, but they believed in him enough that they recognized him as king until the bitter end. And so there's a lot of fighting going on. Unfortunately for him, he isn't really successful. He doesn't win, but he does manage to hold on to Iran, at least in some form, for a decade. You know, going back and forth, retaking cities and fighting to the last man. He tries his best. I think that should be recognized. I don't think he should go for a very high score because ultimately he does fail, but he's trying his darndest. So yeah, I don't know. My initial instinct is like a 4 because ultimately he loses, but just the amount of fighting he does is so impressive that I think it's worth recognizing it.
Yeah, especially because the odds were not in his favor.
You know, to be fair to him, Qadisiyah, the first battle, was basically equal sides.
Yeah.
Although, again, the Arabs say, oh, there were 1 million Persians, and the Persians say, oh, there were 1 million Arabs.
Yeah.
And it's like, they were probably about the same. While Nahavad, the sources say that the Persians were at least outnumbering 2-1 the Arabs, and in the most significant case, it was 3-1, depending on the estimates. So, yes, you also need to think about the quality. Yazdegerd's forces at Nahavad were people he had trained in the 6 years and just rapidly cobbled together, while the Arab forces had fought for decades under their prophet and were filled with religious fervor and were veterans of tens, if not hundreds of battles they had constantly won. So, clearly there's a disparity there, but, you know, depends how you want to rate that.
I don't think we can give him a very high rating because he does lose.
No, yeah.
But I think he has to get a rating, if anything, by the perseverance and all of the military experience that he did have.
Yeah.
So maybe a 5?
You're going up to a 5? I think I'm going to stick with my 4 just to show that it was good, but it was defeats.
That sounds good.
So, with a 4 and a 5, he gets a 9 out of 20 for battle hardness. Our next category is scheminess. How good was he at plots and manipulations? Not at all, really. He was a child who was put on the throne because, he'll do. And then the rest of his reign, he didn't really have the luxury of scheming. He was just trying to survive. And yes, Caliph Umar was killed by an assassinated slave, but also it's not like Yazdegerd told him to do that. Yeah. It just happened. So, yeah, fine. So, I think scheminess is just a big round 0. So, yeah, with a 0 and a 0, we get a 0 out of 20 for scheminess. Our next category is shock factor. How shocking was this man? Well, he was made king at a very young age, despite everything being on fire. And I don't know how shocking you want to say that he just continued fighting constantly. And just kept it up, even when most people would have just said, oh, well, it's all lost. I might as well retire to a life of luxury in China. He just said, no, I will stay with my people. I will keep fighting. When he did suggest at some point to flee to China and fight from there, but then when people told him, well, nobody would follow you anymore.
Yeah.
If you do that, he said, okay, no, then I'll stay and I'll fight to the very last. So I don't know if you want to consider that shocking or if you think it's already in his battle hardness, but
I don't think that's shocking. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the main shocking bits. He doesn't, execute anybody. He is just trying his best and does what he can, I suppose. Do you think this is worth any points at all for the fact that, he was a child king after a terrible period? And we should keep in mind that at least 4 years into his reign, he managed to rule. So the crisis period was over. Like, he reigned as much as the 9 previous successions before him on his own. And, that's pretty cool. Maybe the empire would have recovered if capital H history hadn't been happening.
Yeah.
So, do you want to give him any points for that? Or do you think he's just like a 0 and that's all?
I mean, I think he did... the thing is compared to who came before him, right?
Yeah.
But I do think he did well because he could have just immediately faded away.
Yeah, exactly.
Because God knows things were complex at this time.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think he deserves some points.
I'd honestly give him a 2. Like, 1 for the being a child king and the stability, and 1 for the whole. It's impressive he lasted this long.
That sounds...
Kept control. You're matching?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with a 2 and a 2, he got a 4 out of 20 for shock factor. Our next category is Aaron Shine. How good was he for the Empire in general and Iran in particular? Well,
actually,
I mean...
great considering what came before. But, you know...
See, it's complicated. If he had died 3 years into his reign, then the crisis period is over. Hooray. Everything's stabilized. The Splinter Kings are being reabsorbed into the Empire. Good. Brilliant. The Empire's a lot better off. But then you have the fact that the Empire falls. The dynasty is extinguished. And also, you could argue that by resisting the Caliphate so much... it was ultimately worse for the people living
I do
Iran.
agree with that, actually.
Because, you know, they had to constantly fight and constantly be massacred and then fight again, then be massacred again, then fight again, be massacred. You know, the nobles stop being a force because they're all exterminated through resisting this invasion.
Although I do not care for the nobles, but yes, I guess you have a point.
Yeah, but the nobles had people that worked for them, so... You know, the people in Mesopotamia actually had it easiest because they managed to sort of surrender as soon as Qadisiyah was lost. And then they were like, okay, we're part of Caliphate now.
Yeah, like
but
we made
in
the
Iran,
choice.
Persia especially, they just really, cities were destroyed and it was a really slow thing. While, you know, they could have done what Syria and Palestine and Egypt did, which was just surrender and it'll be fine.
I do agree. Like, I did think while we were talking about it that... While it's super impressive that like he kept going, I think it is a very torturous way to go. I think it would have been much easier and kinder to the people living in the Empire to just accept defeat.
Yeah, that's
So you
definitely
have a
an
good
argument,
point.
but then again, when there are people fighting for their homeland and saying, "No, I don't want to be invaded. I don't want my whole way of life to change." Well, fair enough, honestly.
That's also valid. Sometimes the suffering, like, is worth it to the person who is resisting.
Yeah.
There's a chance to recover what they've lost, and they would rather cling to that chance. And I don't blame that.
So how would you rate this? This is a bit of a complicated one, because the Empire is gone. It's changed beyond all sight. Not only the Empire, the dynasty is gone, and the religion will fade away.
Yeah.
Like, again, the religion now is a minority religion. There is no majority Zoroastrian country in the world anymore because, well, this history happened. So, how do you rate that? Do you want to give like points because, well, he did resist, he tried his best? Do you want to recognize that, or do you want to say that ultimately he did fail and devastation was left in the wake of his resistance? What side of this do you fall on?
I still want to give some points for the fact that it was better than what came before him.
That's true and entirely valid.
Because, boy, have we been suffering. I don't necessarily think his like efforts brought good things to the Empire. Then again, if he had succeeded, it could have been different. So I can't just judge him being like, well, clearly it was all bad because like look at how they ended up. When, like, it was all for nothing, but, like, they didn't know it was all for nothing.
Yeah, maybe this was the one time that they managed to defeat the invaders.
We've seen that
finally
before.
Retake the Empire. You don't know. That happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think that's a bit cruel to judge in those terms and be like, oh, you should have just given up right at the beginning. But it's like, yeah, you know now the outcome. But yeah, even then, it's not like we can give that many points because, like, it's not a good time for the Empire. It is the end, after all.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I'm going to give a token 1 to recognize that he tried and he at least ended the crisis. I mean, he didn't end the crisis period, but his presence ended the crisis period, not his actions. So I'm going to give just a 1 to recognize that. But beyond that, I think it's just such a complete change that there's not much you can do. What do you think?
I think I'll go for a 2.
2? Okay, fair enough. So, Yeah, with a 1 and a 2, he gets a 3 out of 20 for Aaron Shine. Our next category is Face of Faces. What do you think this man looked like? I'll send you his crown, the last Sassanid crown, Serial. We have no more. The crown stopped being a thing. So, yep, sad times.
I guess this is it.
Well, as you can imagine, this crown is very much in the style of Khosrow II, his grandfather, because everybody needed that legitimacy.
We will take what we have.
Exactly.
Oh, this is a good crown.
Okay, so Serial has finished their drawing. Let me pick it up and I'll describe it to you all. Oh, damn. That's very good. I love this.
It had to be a bit,
cool.
Represent how
Very
he was
good.
the face of the revolution, or the face of the, hanging on movement.
Very nice. So, what we have here is Yazdegerd himself. He wears the robes, they're glorious, but most of all, he has a massive cloak billowing around him, spinning up into the air. He is standing upon a pile of rubble, a hill perhaps. And as he stands there, he is raising his fist up in the air, calling his people to resist the invasion and to continue fighting on. And there are clouds swirling around, centering in his fist. And at the center is his crown, just like Khosrow's one, with wings, a moon, and a star. And he stands there, looking, with hair billowing in the wind, ready to carry on the fight for as long as he has breath. So, thank you, Serial. This is very, very cool and a very fitting ending to the podcast as a last capstone portrait.
We've come a long way since our Dioki's the first drawing.
Exactly. It's been a while. And yeah, so all of you definitely should check this out. So to do this, go to our episode notes in the description, on our Discord if you're a patron, or go to our website and find Serial's portrait gallery. Now let me show Serial what he actually looked like. And we have...
in all of those coins.
3 images.
Ooh.
Exactly. I have 3 images. I have a young image, an old image, and then a surprise image.
Oh, okay. Whatever do you mean?
Here is the young image.
That was very funny. It was just one of the most simplified coins we've seen so far. Which is so funny because they just keep getting more stylized. And this one is...
out of resources, Serial.
At this point, there's barely an outline of their face. It's just here's the eye, and the nose, and a beard, and a crown. You put together the rest.
Have a beard in this one. It's just a young man with no beard. Just bare chin.
True, so no beard. You can see the nose and the nose bridge tied to the eye, and then some locks of hair, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
The mouth, the crown, and the typical frame with the moon and the stars on both sides and on the bottom of it. And the writing. It's a funny looking coin, honestly. It's very funny to me that they do keep getting more stylized somehow.
Yeah, it's fun. And then here next is the aged coin. This is one of the ones that were minted in Fars, in Persia proper. This is the last year, the year that Yazdegerd died.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so he's got a pretty distinguishable profile, with a bit of a hook nose, but no, I think that's just probably part of the stylization too. It's got a short beard, with defined rows of locks. I guess the hair, although you can't see it very well, but you have the typical hair / back of the crown sort of coming together.
Mm-hmm.
And the letters around, presumably saying Yazdegerd III, King of Kings, whatever.
That's right.
The crown and the tunic and jewelry and, the robes. I don't know if the ear has an earring or if that's just the ear.
I feel like it's an earring, I'd guess, but
we've seen that before.
Makes sense. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not one of the more impressive coins that I've seen. This one is also fairly eroded away. I guess it saw a lot of use because it's gotten flattened in some areas.
And now, Serial, as my third secret coin, I'm going to show you a coin of a caliph right after Yazdegerd III.
Oh.
Tell me what you notice.
It's the same, except there's some writing in Arabic at the bottom, right?
Yep. Yep, there's a new language, but yeah.
It's the same coin. I mean, like, it's not the same coin literally, but it follows the same pattern of, like, same short beard, same, like, stylization, like the nose and the eye, and
That's right.
like, it is the same person. It's the same crown too.
Yeah, pretty much. It is always Khosrow II's crown,
Yes.
constantly. The fact is that for the next, at the very least, 50 years, we will
They
have
keep him in the
coins
coins?
in Iran that
Oh
they
my
just keep
God.
minting as if the empire were
That
still
is
there.
so funny. That is so, like, I don't know.
So,
I find it endearing now, like, you know, a bunch of years after.
yeah.
But that is an interesting choice. But I guess it's to give the people, like, the sense that not everything is changing at once.
Yeah, that's right. They also keep the Roman ones in Roman lands.
Yeah. Fair. And, like, it's fair because you said that the caliphate and the new emerging Arabian Empire is following this sort of conquest where they basically leave things as they are. They just say, now you pay us taxes and we rule you, but, like, for all of you, basically everything stays the same. So it would make sense that they wouldn't want to, like, mess up a bunch of bureaucratic and cultural things if they don't need to be changed. So it was basically like, oh,
Yeah, exactly.
there's a new religion, you get some benefits if you do convert, but you don't, like, necessarily have to. And there's new upper management, and that's it. So, yeah. Wow.
There we go. So what would you say of this portrait? How much would you rank Yazdegerd's Face of Faces?
I mean, I think seeing how the coin then evolves is very funny. Ultimately, I don't think it's a very interesting coin, other than the fact that you could be like, oh, I recognize this coin because it is the last one of the Persian Empire. Like, it would be a cool one to have simply because it's the last. Yeah. But as a coin and as a depiction of this king, you know.
It's fine. I like that we have young Yazdegerd versus
Yeah.
older Yazdegerd. I mean, older. He died when he was, like, in his late 20s, so it's not terribly old. But yeah, I think I'm going for a 3. That's my thought.
I think I'll go for a 3 as well. That seems fair.
Okay, very good. So with a 3 and a 3, he gets a 1.5 out of 5 for Face of Faces. Our next category is lengthiness. For how long do you think he reigned?
19 years.
Actually, it was 18 years, because he lives up until
Okay, whatever.
651,
Take one, you know.
but Persia is finally lost in 650, so there we go. So yeah, he rules from 632 to 650, giving him a total of 18 years. Divide that by 10, and you get a 1.8 out of 5 for lengthiness. Which brings us to the final score, which is a grand total of 27.3 out of 100, which places him below Ardashir II, above Artaxerxes I, and exactly tied with his mother/aunt Azarmidocht.
Huh. I guess. I can see that.
Yeah, you can see it. It's reasonable.
Yeah.
It's a reasonable position for him to be in. But that leads us to the final question, the final time this season, Serial, which is to say, is he Child King enough? Is he struggling enough? Is he final enough to be a Shahanshah? Or is he just a Shahanah?
I'm not sure.
Do you think it's worth it for all the struggle he went through? Or is the fact that he's ultimately failing?
He's not a
damning
quitter,
enough?
but also, like, he's not as cool of a story as it could have been, right? Because if he had won, actually, that would have been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been a story for the ages, of course, but
I don't want to give it to him plainly on the fact that, like, oh, he's the last one of this period.
I will tell you that none of our previous last kings got it. So every other last king before him
Because they don't tend to be, like,
lost it
particularly,
in favor of someone
you know,
new.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But do you think that the fact that he kept trying is worth putting him in the pantheon with other greats such as his grandfather Khosrow, Bahram Chobin, Khosrow I?
That's what I'm
Musa,
considering. Just
Cyrus,
because
Darius.
it's so unusual that he would keep going and trying, and
That's definitely
you know.
admirable, yeah.
But I don't feel that, you know, like, I don't think it paid off. Really.
Yeah, fair.
It's just a bit disappointing. It's not the cool story. I mean, it is still a cool story. You don't have to have like a victorious or a happy ending just to like. There's victory in resistance, and there's victory in
But
perseverance.
also, in a lot of the sources, he's not the hero of the story. He's the old decadent order that is being swept away by the new light of Islam. And, he has the past that's being set aside.
It's true.
But, depends how you want to frame it. It can either be a desperate and noble resistance against an invader for your way of life, or as the old world trying to cling on to its
that's the thing.
corrupt ways that had brought so much hardship.
I'm trying to judge like his story, the episode as a whole, him as a person.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced.
I'm honestly more on the no side. Like, I could be convinced if you were
no.
of the opinion, but
then it's going to be a no.
I think. I'm sorry, Yazdegerd. Once again, you tried and struggled, but
you got to be
failed.
on every single episode of the podcast. So, hey.
Exactly. That's good. You are definitely remembered. You're just not up in the pantheon of the best kings. So, I'm sorry, Yazdegerd. You can go off into the desert and meet your Aunt Boran and say that, I mean, the legitimacy crisis is over. There's other problems now, but hey, you tried. You tried as best you could, and your descendants will live in China as pampered nobles. So, could be worse, I suppose. And that is the end of our episode and our series, everybody. We hope you enjoyed Yazdegerd III. We hope you enjoyed going from Diocles all the way to Yazdegerd III with us across these 3 years or so. And, well, we hope you're all ready and excited for what's coming next, because we will be having draws for the championship where we'll get to decide who the best King of Kings is.
The ultimate ranking.
Yes, we have 25 contestants who have gotten Shah and Shah, and we'll be splitting them up into groups and then deciding among these groups who wins, sort of like a football tournament, and eventually decide who is the first, second, and third best King of Kings. So finally, we will have an answer to the question that people ask me when I tell them I have a podcast, which is like, oh, so what's a good king to start from? And I'll be like, well, demonstrably this one is the best.
Yes.
So start
We
from
have
that.
proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nobody will have any other opinion. Nobody will take issue with our decision. I'm sure it will be unanimously,
Simple,
objectively true.
Yes, but at least one thing that we know now is that I'll tell you the podium of, at least in points. The podium in points is Darius the Great with 80.1 as the maximum scorer of this season.
I'm not surprised.
Second is Shapur II with 78 points, so also massively impressive. And third place is Khosrow I, Khosrow the Immortal Soul, with 74.8 out of 100.
Interesting.
And then, well, let's do the top 5. Antiochus III with 74.6.
Yes.
And tied for 5th place are Khosrow II with 71.7 and Alexander the Great with 71.7 as well.
Yeah, I figured.
So these are the top 5, and I'll just give you a quick startup for what we're going to be doing next time with the draws. To ensure that we don't get all the hardest competitions in the first rounds, we're going to be having a group for each of the top 5. And then we will sort people into those groups, and we'll see how that goes. Because points don't necessarily mean that you had the best story. Cyrus scored relatively low, for example. We'll get to find out how all these people compare. And also, there will be a fun round of So Cyril thinks they can rule Persia.
You got it.
Where we'll see if they'll do a good job or not. Yes.
I'm inclined to say no. But we're going through video game rules, which means I get more than one attempt. So
Exactly. Yeah, easy. You can reload and it'll save. But yeah. So, that is the end of our episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to support us, then there are many ways to do so. You can support us on Patreon, where we have a bunch of extra episodes, and For as little as $1 a month, you can just get these extra episodes. And if you would like, you can contribute to finding more extra episodes that will be coming on later on. At the end of this month, we'll be having our Intelligent Speech conference from a couple years ago on Alexander the Great and the myth around him as we find it in the Shahnameh. So it's a heavily distorted version, but it'll be cool. He goes on a quest to find immortality. That's fun.
You know, if you have nothing to do on a Saturday.
If instead you'd rather not support us monetarily, that's fine. But if you've listened so far, if you've come with us from Diakis to Yazdegerd III, we'd really appreciate if you could give a review of why you kept listening. Because it's been 92 episodes. Clearly there must have been a reason. So let us know. Let us know what your favorite episode was.
Oh, please.
Let us know who you think should win at the final rounds.
Place your bets.
We'll be having polls on our social media on the rounds to see if you'll match our decisions. But let us know in your reviews. That'd be great. That'd be really cool to see. So we can all end this together in the best of ways. But yeah, this has been a long enough episode. So I would say, without any further ado, we hope you have a lovely week. And we'll see you next time as we start to find out who is the greatest Shahan Shah. Goodbye.
Goodbye.